So yes, I'm joined by my colleague, Marcie McLean-McKay, who's the acting manager of the Consumer Research and Experimentation team. I am Dave Hayes. You're going to hear a little bit from both of us today. And we're pleased to share some of the work that we do at the agency. You'll notice that this is a pretty high-level overview, and it will touch on a number of different projects. And that's because we know how diverse the audience is, and we're hoping to mention something that resonates with each of you. And so if we do, feel free to ask a question after the presentation or even reach out to us separately. So we'll be including our contact information at the end. So I'll be talking a little bit about the National Financial Literacy Strategy and its associated measurement plan. And then I'll pass it over to Marcie, who will share some of the experiments, interventions, and consumer tools led by the BFL, or the Behavioral Finance Lab, that are aligned and contribute to advancing the goals of the strategy. In governments, as with everywhere, and especially academia, we love our acronyms. So I'll try to avoid them as much as possible. Okay, first, I want to tell you a little bit about the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. That's a mouthful, so I'm just going to say FCAC. As I know some folks might not be as familiar. So FCAC is an independent regulator that protects financial consumers by supervising the compliance of federally regulated entities, so such as banks, with their legislative obligations, codes of conduct, and public commitments, and by strengthening the financial literacy of Canadians. So we educate consumers about their rights and responsibilities when dealing with institutions like banks, and when opening and using personal bank accounts and other types of financial products like credit cards and mortgages, or when filing a complaint. We also monitor, evaluate, and promote awareness of trends and issues that might affect financial consumers. And we also publish research and develop consumer information and tools that you'll hear about today that further support and strengthen financial literacy and resilience for Canadians. Okay, so this slide is a little bit busy, but I wanted to put it up here and just summarize a few key messages. So one is that the Behavioral Finance Lab is situated within the Research, Policy, and Education branch, within this broader branch. So we focus on studying financial consumers to understand their capabilities and behaviors. And we work closely with the financial ecosystem. So that's just a fancy way to say stakeholders across the country, across different sectors. And we do this in many different ways to test, measure, drive, and scale better financial outcomes for Canadians. So we collect data through large-scale national surveys that you'll hear about. We report on this data, but we also freely share it with stakeholders, like many of the folks who might be in the audience. So please reach out if you're interested in learning more about the data. We also use these data to inform our policy and program development and to create experiments, interventions, and digital tools. So all of this work is guided by the National Financial Literacy Strategy. You see that little rainbow down there, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that right here. So this figure is what we affectionately call the strategy rainbow. It represents our National Financial Literacy Strategy. This version, it's the second strategy, was published in July of 2021. So it's a 5-year plan to create a more accessible, inclusive, and effective financial literacy ecosystem for all Canadians, and to promote the building of financial resilience in, as we know, an increasingly digital world. So the strategy represents a significant shift in focus compared to the first one. So rather than actions that individuals can take, which is still very much here, you can see that at the bottom part of the rainbow, there are, managing expenses, debt, and savings, and, improving confidence and knowledge and navigating the marketplace. But beyond that, the strategy focuses on placing the onus on the ecosystem to make changes to improve outcomes for financial consumers. So that includes financial institutions, policymakers, regulators, and community groups. So organizations across the spectrum. And these changes are represented here by the 6 overarching priorities that you see at the top of the rainbow, from communicating in ways people understand to strengthening consumer protection measures at the end. So this is sort of an unpacking a little bit more of that rainbow. And so there's a bit of a flow diagrams to highlight, how these things connect a bit better. And so you'll notice the 3 ecosystem changes are grouped into 2 broader categories to help consumers. And the first is to help reduce barriers within the financial system that can limit individuals from accessing, understanding, or using products and services, and provide support that could be helpful to them. For example, a barrier might be when information about financial products and services is written with jargon or is very difficult to understand. And the second group is to help catalyze actions. And you can see those grouped sort of in a stack of three there. Because even when there's no barriers, or when there are no barriers, consumers might not always be able to make the right financial decisions, the ones most appropriate for them at the right time. So therefore, it's important to catalyze actions to create opportunities so people can make, better financial decisions for themselves. And it emphasizes the belief that consumers shouldn't bear the responsibility to make things better all alone, and that the financial ecosystem also needs to better support consumers. So it really highlights quickly and simply how these changes that I mentioned are really critical to facilitating the actions and bolstering the abilities of consumers at the end of the day, as we move sort of a rightward in the diagram. And ultimately, all of these sort of changes and actions will lead to stronger financial resilience. So the framework is built upon evidence and requires continued collaboration between all stakeholders. It's not for instance, FCAC doing all of these things alone, although you'll hear a lot of FCAC actions that contribute to these priorities today. But we really work closely with stakeholders across the board, from academics, nonprofits, for-profits, other government organizations to help make progress in these goals. Okay, and I said already, this term, the financial literacy ecosystem, really means the broadest range of stakeholders, including all those folks I just mentioned. Anybody really working in in the financial literacy space in any way. So the approach to financial literacy in Canada has really been based on collaboration across jurisdictions and among various players in the ecosystem. And I'm certain a lot of you today are members of this ecosystem. So again, don't hesitate to reach out after the presentation. And it's also important to note that of all the things I'm going to show you, particularly the strategy and the measurement plan, stakeholders were involved with all of these as well, and were invited to roundtables and provided input. And so this is not solely created by the agency, but it's actually the work of many different groups and people. So I just want to give one quick example of a stakeholder group that might resonate with some of the members of this audience, and that we have a research committee. So you might recognize a few folks on that list who work across a range of financial literacy related topics, and from digital literacy to financial inclusion and vulnerability to the incorporation of behavioral insights aimed to address financial challenges. So it really is quite a broad list of folks and topics. And I also want to tell you a little bit about how the national strategy sets out measurable targets to achieve its outcomes. So because how we collectively track those targets was not initially clear. So this the measurement plan is a companion piece to the national strategy, which was called Make Change That Counts. And then we created a national strategy measurement plan, which is named Counting Change. I'm trying to be cheeky here. And the collection and interpretation of timely data has played a key role in the development of the strategy, including our regular collection of national level survey data. And so there are always people with research expertise involved in every stage. So the measurement plan, as I said, was the result of extensive collaboration, talking and consulting with over 100 stakeholders across the country, similar to how we developed the strategy. And through these engagements, we gathered insight into the measures that stakeholders were already using that might be aligned with the priorities of the strategy, those 6 priorities across the top of the rainbow that I showed you. And also were helpful in identifying where the gaps are and where we can collectively define new measures, where there might not be some, to help us determine what works and what doesn't work. Many stakeholders have agreed to sign on voluntarily as adopters by sharing examples of strategy-aligned initiatives, measures, and finding from their own work. And here are some of those adopters right on this page. So although we work with over 100 ecosystem stakeholders, all of whom are contributing to the goals of the national strategy in some way or another, we have a special category for stakeholders who are measuring their impact in alignment with the strategy. So when any stakeholders agree, I don't know if you can hear me. My dog is barking at the mailman behind me. Yeah, doesn't have the same filter function. At any rate, when any stakeholders agree to publicly share the strategy aligned measures and findings associated with any kind of initiative. So when we say initiative, we really mean anything from surveys to webinars, courses, online tools, apps, you name it. We refer to them as adopters of the measurement plan. So we currently have 34 adopters and are adding more all the time. And the work of adopters in measuring the impact of the financial literacy initiatives is highlighted in our online measurement plan tools. So the measurement plan, these aren't just documents that people read, they can also engage with them. And so actually stakeholders can look up, can look into a measures library for strategy aligned measures that they could borrow themselves. And they're also able to see the kind of work that other stakeholders are doing and what those findings might be. So what you're seeing here is a static screenshot on the right of our interactive national strategy dashboard and one of the other tools. And that helps to gather measures and results and showcase the work of adopters. And it also helps to assess the impact of our, again, collective efforts and how our initiatives are helping to make progress. And with this tool, all stakeholders have been able to view the emerging research insights, the initiatives, and also learn more about other adopters of the measurement plan that are helping to advance the goals. The basic tools will be actually enhanced in this year, in 2025, when we release a larger research data and exchange platform to help stakeholders more easily see and use our work and share their own work as well. So we're continuing to encourage more stakeholders to sign on as adopters because we recognize the impact of again, working together. And we currently have, as you saw on the last slide, representation from many different sectors, but including Bear. Bear is an adopter of the measurement plan, which is great. And we work with a number of stakeholders and we encourage folks to just share their findings and their strategy aligned measures so that the others can see what they're doing. And FCAC is not only a leader of the National Financial Literacy Strategy, but we are also adopters. So we're one of these adopters, and that means that we have our own experts using behavioral science and human-centered design principles to create interventions, experiments, tools, and other resources to help people make better financial decisions. And those are aligned with the strategy as well, the priorities of the strategy. So with that, I'll pass it over to Marcie to tell you a little bit more of some of those contributions that align with the priorities of the strategy.
Thanks, Dave, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about the work that the research and experimentation team at FCC is doing in alignment with the National Financial Literacy Strategy. So I'll start a little bit by telling you what the Behavioral Finance Lab is, what it does, and then I'll share some of the exciting research that the team is working on, including some of the results of the recent research projects. Some of the work has already been published, but other projects are still ongoing. So I'll be providing a high-level overview of each project, but I will really invite you to ask questions at the end of the presentation or to follow up with me directly if you like more detailed information. I'm more than happy to connect you with the lead researchers on each of these files. And after this presentation, we'll have a Q&A session where I'd love to hear from you on how your projects, your findings relate to the work that we're doing. Dave, would you mind skipping ahead to this slide? Yes. So a little bit about the Behavioral Finance Lab. First, I want to say that strengthening financial literacy goes beyond providing information and increasing knowledge. Research shows that knowledge is not sufficient for behavior change, and I'm sure that all of you know this. But we have these examples in our day-to-day lives. So knowing we should eat healthy or knowing we should go to the gym doesn't necessarily lead to these behaviors for various reasons, right? So it could be due to barriers like not having access to a gym. For others, they may have a gym at home. And so it's not about access, but it's about, other constraints like motivation or time. And Dave spoke to these barriers and catalysts as part of our national strategy earlier. So building beneficial habits and being consistent is difficult. And the same is true of beneficial financial behavior. So this is why at the Behavioral Finance Lab, or in BFL, we use behavioral science principles to nudge consumers to make better financial decisions and to adopt beneficial behaviors. So in BFL, we follow a feedback loop for our research and experimentation. So first, we understand consumers' needs and the broader context through some of our population level surveys, our foundational research, and user testing. And then we tailor interventions based on existing evidence and consumer needs. And then third, we launch and we test these interventions, iterating and scaling what works and adjusting what doesn't. So this approach helps us to learn from failures and improve our ability to nudge positive financial behaviors. The feedback loop really embodies our lab approach of understanding, designing, experimenting, iterating, and learning. So over the past several years, we have directly impacted about 673,000 consumers through our interventions and experiments. And about 193,000 have made better financial decisions as a result. So, we know that just-in-time information provides consumers information at points when they're making decisions, when it's relevant to them. So the timing is an important factor, but also so is the medium. So at the Behavioral Finance Lab, we work in collaboration with partners to be able to leverage web platforms to enable us to reach larger audiences. And also through digital platforms, it allows us to make adjustments quickly based on our findings. So it's really an agile iteration to continually make improvements to our interventions based on the ways that consumers are responding. And so it's really about having quick and efficient access to data, and also it helps us to measure impact as well. I'll say as well that the Behavioral Finance Lab tests interventions using various research methods. So we do use pre and post surveys to measure changes, but we also use true experiments or the gold standard RCTs where possible to assess impact. And so in the next few slides, I'll share some examples of the work that we've done. And so the first two projects that I'd like to share with you are on the topic of girls' financial confidence. So one population highlighted in our national strategy that can benefit from tailored approaches is women. And so we know from research that women struggle with their finances compared to men. They're more likely to need to borrow to meet day-to-day expenses. They spend more than their incomes. They feel less confident in their financial capability. So unfortunately, this gap does begin quite early in life. And so recognizing this, we explored early interventions to help girls feel more financially confident. And we designed an intervention to close the gender gap in financial confidence, targeting women aged 16 to 25. And we targeted this group because they're often at a stage in their lives where they are making decisions for the first time on their own. And so with academic support, we developed two online brief interventions. The first one was a recall and share intervention that involved participants engaging with an online platform featuring real stories from young women. They then shared their own experiences, and the whole idea was inspired by research suggesting that seeing confident role models boost confidence. And then the second intervention was a find and explain intervention. And this is where participants had the opportunity to define new financial concepts in a crowdsourced or an urban dictionary, if you will. And this active engagement aimed to increase both knowledge and confidence. And so we tested these interventions with about 1,000 young Canadian women, and the results showed that participating in these interventions, women reported higher confidence in comparison to the control group, and that effect lasted at least a week. We also found that participants demonstrated improvements in financial behaviors over time. There were no differences between the treatment and control groups, but we think it's due to the fact that all participants, whether they participated in the control or the treatment, increased their behaviors. And so, this really speaks to, if a 5-minute short intervention can have that kind of boost 1 week later, it speaks to the possibility of how repeated exposure or longer interventions could have a more lasting impact. So encouraging women to think and talk about their finances may help them feel more confident in their financial capabilities. And then the next study was conducted with a younger age group. This one was not an RCT. It did not involve a control in the treatment. It was a pre and post survey. So in February 2022, we launched an intervention to boost the financial knowledge and confidence of young consumers. And so we worked with a company called Chatter High, who offered a gamified platform that was used in schools all across Canada. And we developed a seek and find activity where students were able to browse government web pages and then answer questions about the materials that they were accessing. We had two learning modules. One was for ages or grades 6 to 12. It was more focused on money management and budgeting. And then the other course that we developed was tailored to grades 9 to 12, and that was about managing money after high school. And so both of these modules introduce fundamental financial concepts, practical tips for helping students gain confidence in their money management, budgeting, and savings. And students had the ability through this platform to earn points for the research that they were conducting and for answering the questions. And so since 2022, we reached over 14,000 students from over 300 schools nationwide. And the results of this intervention was successful in many areas that we assessed. Knowledge about budgeting and credit cards increased for both boys and girls. But what is especially promising is that the gender gap actually closed in some areas. So when we look at knowing where to find information and understanding, future expenses, the gender gap actually closed. So girls were performing the same as boys at the end of the study. And so we've recently just scaled up this project. We've continued to make our modules available across the country, and we'll continue to do so until at least the summer of 2025. We have the potential to develop some new modules and to adjust the target audience of our interventions as well. So if you're interested in learning more about both of these projects, I will say that the research briefs have been published on canada.ca, and full research reports are coming soon. But the research briefs do provide a good high-level overview of the findings. Another experiment that I'll share is one that was actually led by Dave. And so this is a low-effort intervention that resulted in more savings for Canadians, and it's the refund to savings experiment. You may have heard of it. It was tested in the United States. There's a lot of research that began in the United States on this, and we applied the learnings to Canada and tested the interventions in Canada. And so in 2021, individuals were nudged to deposit their tax refund into a savings account at the point of filing taxes. So filers saw a message encouraging them to save their refund. They received educational information on the benefits of saving, and they had the option to change their direct deposit account to a savings account. And so through this intervention, we motivated a motivated subgroup of over 600,000 participants reported using their savings account for the refund. And this resulted in a 17% increase in the savings rate and more money saved overall. This is one of the largest experiments that FCC has participated in. overall, the pilot led to about an estimated 1.3 million increase in self-reported savings. So there is a potential that if this project is scaled up, it could result in 23 million in additional saving deposits for every 1 million Canadians exposed to the intervention. So it really demonstrates how a small but timely intervention can promote positive financial behaviors. And this paper was also published earlier this year and is available on canada.ca. The next two projects involve a partnership with a healthy lifestyle app called Optimity. We collaborated with Optimity to provide interventions aimed at empowering Canadians to improve their money management and build savings. And so the debt management study was conducted in response to what we were noticing from some of our populational level surveys, what was happening in the economic environment as well. So following the pandemic, there was a lot of financial pressures. There was a rise in cost of living, high inflation, and some of the population level data that we had were showing that a growing number of individuals were experiencing vulnerabilities. And so we work with Optimity to design and test whether gamified quizzes on debt management strategies could motivate Canadians to pay off their credit card debt specifically. So between June 2022 and March 2023, we delivered quizzes to over 25,000 app users, of whom about 43% reported having credit card debt. And so participants provided answers to debt-related questions through gamified quizzes, and they earned gems for completing the quizzes. So it was a gamified platform. And what we're seeing through some of our preliminary results is that participants who completed the intervention were significantly more likely to report decreases in debt over the 10-month period. And so I'm not able to go into much more of the results at this time, but analysis are ongoing, and we do hope to provide or make the report available soon. The other study is an ongoing study as well. It's one that was conducted with Optimity Rewards, and it was focusing on budgeting behaviors. So we did some previous research a few years back on budgeting. And so this is a continuation of that work, and we're applying learning. And so what we saw was that budgets were linked to positive financial outcomes like paying bills on time. And we wanted to examine how different budgeting patterns, so such as not budgeting, budgeting intermittently, or budgeting consistently, were associated with different outcomes. And so the preliminary results show that, again, using a budget is linked to positive outcomes for many participants. Those who consistently use a budget showed very positive financial outcomes, and we even saw some positive outcomes for intermittent budgeters when they were budgeting. And an important takeaway from this research as well is that it seems as though that a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. It's not appropriate when we're talking about budgeting behaviors. Some participants in the study did really well without using a budget. And so from this, we conclude that budgeting interventions should focus really on the barriers. So reducing the barriers for those who find budgeting helpful and tailoring strategies to individual needs. And so this paper as well will be posted published on canada.ca in the coming year. Another study that I'd like to share with you is a partnership that we have with Employment and Social Development Canada. So we recently partnered with ESDC to run an experiment targeting student loan borrowers. The intervention is an online training module provided to student borrowers 1 month before they start repaying their loans. And through this intervention, we are targeting over 150,000 student loan borrowers. And so from the right side of this slide, you can see that the training module is designed to be interactive and concise. The example shown is how the training module helps student loan borrowers understand interest rates. And so we've just started to run this experiment in September of last year, and we will continue, we'll collect the data, and once we receive the data in fall 2026, we will analyze the results and produce a research report on these findings as well. The other team that falls under our behavior finance lab is our consumer digital products team. And so the agency has, so in addition to our experimental pilots, we develop digital tools to help consumers with various financial decisions. And the agency has 7 tools, which are highly regarded by our stakeholders. So one example would be the budget planner. And this tool was actually created in collaboration with behavioral science experts at the University of Toronto to ensure that users can create a customized budget in 3 simple steps. In addition to the budget planner, FCC also offers a mortgage tool, tools to compare financial products, and tools to help individuals with their financial goals. Our tools receive over 4.2 million visits, or they did receive 4.2 million visits in 2023-24, and this accounts for about 1/3 of all of the traffic to the current website. We also emphasize human-centered design, and we leverage consumer tool feedback analysis to inform the work that we do. So through this process, we begin by understanding consumer needs through comprehensive feedback, and this allows us to prioritize various suggestions that we receive from consumers and refine our tools to maximize user experience and allocate resources effectively. And so by employing a human-centered design approach, we ensure that responses are tailored to meet the needs of consumers, and it makes our tools more intuitive and impactful. So as a final thought, although we spent most of our time talking about FCC efforts, as Dave had mentioned, I want to reiterate that this is a collective effort. Many of the projects shared today involve collaborations with other stakeholders. So helping to strengthen the financial literacy, well-being, and resilience requires the work of many stakeholders, such as yourselves. Many of you are already contributing in this way, but I wanted to highlight that there are also many ways to work with FCC. So if you have financial literacy initiatives, or if you use resources, we'd love to hear, use our resources, we'll love to hear about it. Also, if you measure the impact of those initiatives, you should consider becoming an adopter of our measurement plan in support of the national strategy. We also mentioned we collaborate with stakeholders from all sectors. So let us know if you have a project in mind that might be in line with the mandate of the agency. If you're in a position to help us scale some of these initiatives that you heard about today, or if there's an opportunity to test these initiatives in a different way, please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you as well. There may be opportunities to collaborate with our behavioral science experts who have developed interventions, experiments, tools, and surveys, for instance. One thing that I didn't mention today through this presentation, I'll just highlight here, is that our population level surveys, so the monthly financial well-being monitor and our Canadian financial capability survey that collect population level data on financial knowledge, financial skills, behaviors, attitudes, financial well-being. Those data are available to external audiences. It's available to the general public. There's a link on the FCC webpage that I could put in the chat. Basically, it's a data request form where you can request access to the data. It's really simple and easy to fill out. All you have to do is provide us with your contact information, the objectives of your research, how you intend to use the data, and you could gain access to those data for your own work. And so I will put that in the chat.
Great, thank you so much. So we have some questions already coming in the Q&A, and I want to also encourage any other attendees who have questions to put them in the Q&A. So the first question, they were really interested in the refunds to savings experiment, and they think that the finding is really interesting, and we're curious about a couple of other things about it. The first is the long-term impact. Did the money stay in their savings accounts, or was it sort of used up like then as soon as the intervention would like passed by a little bit? And also, did this help create a habit that they behave differently the next year, or is that something that you're looking at and thinking about?
Yeah, I can jump in. We don't know. We would love to know about the longer term habits. So we had the benefit of adopting and adapting the work from our colleagues in the US at the Social Policy Institute at the University of Washington that we worked with. They're the ones who really created refund to savings originally, and they tested it over almost a 10-year span. And so we were able to sort of distill some of the core findings that the core elements that worked the best in an intervention, and then of course adapt it to a Canadian audience, which is different than a US audience. And so we had that benefit, but we didn't have the ability in this version to be able to follow up long term. So we don't know the answer to that. And in fact, when you get into the details, there are, a number of unknowns in terms of what people did with the savings. We were able to follow up and get a sample actually of a survey that happened post intervention, and got a sense of what people meant by savings, because although the intervention is about changing your direct deposit, so to your tax refund goes into your checking account, we want you to switch it to your savings account, because there's evidence that if you do just that, then you'll treat the money differently, right? You'll use it differently. But in Canada, it's a bit of a different scenario than in the US. There are a number of people that it appears as though they say, well, the intervention works. I'm willing. I do hear the messaging. I want to save it, but it's going to be easier for me to not change it to a savings account right now. And so we have a sneaking suspicion that it goes into the checking, they move it over to savings or use it for negative savings, like paying down debt and those kinds of things. Well, we would love to follow up with exactly what happens, but the short answer is we don't quite know.
That's super interesting. Another question sort of related to that same project is, and I guess in general, how do you think of this question of oversaving, right? Are the people who you're getting to save people who are already saving and they're just saving more? Has any economic analysis been done on sort of like, how is this increasing the savings, and I guess who's doing that increase in savings?
Yeah, so we did have the opportunity to do a bit of analysis here, and without going too deep into the details, because if you get me talking about it, I'll keep talking about it for the rest of the time. So, but I will say this, that we were able to do to take a look at sort of the nuances of what's happening, and it turns out that they're a bit tricky to sort of explain, but essentially, to not confuse the issue, but essentially there are folks, we were able to do the analysis by income, for instance, and by tax refund level, and we found that folks who were making less were able to save. Now, again, that might be negative savings in terms of paying down debt and just thinking about the money in a different way instead of a bonus, which we've seen from previous research that some people, it's not necessarily their money coming back to them and being able to, you're able to use it in a certain way, but some people sort of consider it a bonus, and then they maybe will go buy something separate or extra. So the nudge seemed to work on folks who were a little bit lower income. It also was working in terms of folks who had a higher, so it was also working on folks that had a higher income, but were less likely to save it. So even though it didn't have as big an impact in terms of savings rate, just that saving was sort of nudging the overall average saving in the experiment upward. And so it sort of had this nice effects on sort of both ends. Yeah, so we know that this sort of low touch approach may work for folks who are getting a refund, a pretty significant amount. The average amount is typically $1,700 back. And this is the largest lump sum that people see in a year. And so the idea of oversaving is an interesting one, and we didn't specifically look at that, but the data suggests that really almost all of us could be saving at least in one version of, whether that's emergency savings or whether that's, again, negative savings, paying down debt or putting toward making even a prepayment on a mortgage or something. Yeah.
Interesting. Another question from one of the attendees is about user testing of products. So can you describe what kinds of user testing approaches the Behavioral Finance Lab is able to use to ensure that they're capturing diverse needs and financial behaviors of different users?
So I'm happy to speak to that. And I would say it's a collective approach that we take at the agency. So we have different user testing throughout the agency, but when we think about product development and first step, determining a need for a product, often this need is identified through sometimes our population level surveys. So we identify an area of difficulty where consumers are struggling, where they need some support in making positive financial decisions. And so oftentimes we're able to identify some areas of priority through our population level surveys. And then, with we do literature review, we look at the ways, best practices, ways that other jurisdictions are addressing similar issues, and we apply those best practices to a product. And a product has several phases as well as it goes through the development stages. So, we identify a conceptual model, kind of what this could look like, and then there's opportunities to consult. So we consult with the general public using different platforms like Playbook UX to gain further insights. We also have a committee of experts. So Dave mentioned the research committee of financial literacy. So we're able to share some kind of the initial ideas with experts in the field to assess whether or not the proposed solution would meet the needs of the population. And then we have experts in user testing on our IT on the development side as well, who feed into the development of a product. And we work with our internal designers. So there's a number of stages that we do go through to ensure that the product will meet the needs of the end user. And I would say as well that it's a continued iteration. So once a product is developed, there's opportunities for users to provide ongoing feedback on the product. And then from these suggestions that are collected through the website, the consumer digital products team they do a qualitative analysis and thematic analysis of these findings, and then they use them to inform future iterations and future enhancements to the products that are existing.
Thanks, that makes sense. Another question that we had is if you can talk about behavioral science and how to ensure that it remains a priority as government's focuses shift and budgets shift. What are you folks doing to keep it a priority? Is there anything that stakeholders and people who care about this should be doing to keep it as a priority?
I can jump in. I mean, there's lots of things potentially to say. So what's nice from the government side is that and this has changed, I think it's changed significantly over the years, is that there is a strong network of folks with with behavioral science backgrounds. So, coming from, behavioral economics to, from like myself, maybe a behavioral neuroscience background or a cognitive psychology or social psychology or all of these different backgrounds. But there's a network of them. And we stay connected and make sure that we're trying to communicate the value and the wins and our ideas. We share those freely. Also, the Treasury Board has an experimentation works group, which identifies behavioral science experts from across government, and then we sort of help each other out. So right now I'm actually working with Health Canada on a side project just as an advisor. And I know that some of my colleagues are doing the same. And so I think that really underscores the value. And of course, we were always trying to shout from the rooftops what improvements, real life improvements, and being able to make the connection between academic work, the things that we see in government, putting those things into practice, and also having this really nice stakeholder network where we're able to see change sort of on the ground from stakeholders. Being able to have that viewpoint really helps as well, because we're always trying to, so if there are academics in the audience and you've got good findings, send them our way. We want to see them. We might not catch them in our regular searches, but also we might be able to say, hey, we know stakeholders who are working in this space. So I think that really helps. I don't know if Marcie has anything to add.
Nothing to add on my things.
Great. Another question from the audience was related to the information gap for women and sort of if there are other impacts of that aside from what you mentioned. So does it contribute to things like interest level in financial matters, biases within the educational system, gender biases in households, sort of have you folks been able to look at wider potential impacts of those interventions?
Yeah. So lots of good questions within this one question. And so I'll start by saying that, oftentimes, people think that women are less financially knowledgeable than men. But it's really, it's a confidence. It's the financial confidence gap. And we do collect some of this information through the Canadian Financial Capability Survey. There was a study that was conducted on an earlier iteration of the survey. So the survey's been conducted since 2009, and it's been conducted on a five-year basis ever since. And so there was a research that was conducted, I think, in 2018 or something like that, looking at differences in confidence. FCC has not looked at gender differences using the population level data with the recent CFCS, but those data are available, and there's an opportunity to do it. Some of the academics that I know of are starting to look into some of the gender differences using the newer data sets. And I'll also say that I'm aware of a study that was conducted by GFLEX, so the Global Financial Education Center, looking at how women respond to knowledge questions. And so when a don't know answer was provided as an option when asked financial knowledge questions, women were more likely to answer that don't know or check off don't know. But when that answer option was removed, women perform just as good as men on some of those financial knowledge questions. So it's not an issue of financial knowledge. It's really related to the financial confidence of women. And so I would say that, you know, we've seen research that suggests that this gender gap and these barriers exist early in life. So younger children, or even sometimes, you know, told that they're not as good as in math as boys, and they're pushed to more like some of the arts programs and so forth. So I would say that you know, there are gender biases that are entrenched in our day-to-day lives, that we can work on reducing as a financial ecosystem. You know, we see women having you know, less of roles in their households in managing finances as well, and that's it seems to be true today. And so there's lots to be done in terms of reducing the gender gap between women and men. The earlier that we begin, you know, the more beneficial for women in the long run.
Thanks. I think we're getting pretty close to time, so I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much, Dave and Marcie, for leading our webinar and for sharing about the work you're doing and how people can get more involved. Hopefully some of the attendees will message you after this. A full recording of this webinar will be available on the BEAR website by clicking the tab Webinars. Also, obviously, I believe that they've shared a link to learn more about the research that the FCAC is doing. So I encourage everyone to check that out. Our next webinar will be on February 11th, and we'll hear from Melania Vinsky from PwC. And you can exit this webinar by closing your Zoom screen. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you again, Dave and Marcie.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.